Okay, if we're doing oil pan replacement, we need our rear main seal replacement. We need a couple things. We need the rear main seal. So, Felpro, been making gaskets and seals forever. Very important. Anaerobic gasket maker. This stuff seals up in the absence of oxygen. Okay. Make sure you have it available. Make sure it's still good. This tube was bought a while ago, but before I got started, I made sure. You can see it poking out there. It's still in liquid form or gel form. You're also going to need some kind of gasket maker. So this is for the corners of the rear main seal. Use the anaerobic for the rear main seal. The corners of the oil pan gasket you'll hit with some form of oil resistant silicone seal. You don't need to goop it along the whole channel, the whole rail. You don't need to goop it all over the place. You don't need to be putting huge amounts of it. That gasket's going to do the job, and it's going to do it really well as long as you use it correctly. This is really cool. So you screw these into the block, into the 4 holes they fit. It'll only fit the larger bolt holes. So it's easy to not make a mistake where to put these. You put that on there, and then you can have this all set up already on your pan. Now, obviously, I'm going to pull this back off and clean this up a little bit first. Just getting packing stuff off. But you get that to lay flat on there. You have those in the block sticking out. They've got ledges on them. So these little ledges will end up popping through these holes and holding the oil pan up in place with the gasket in place, giving you time to run the bolts in, get them in finger tight first, and then go back and torque them. And pull those out, unthread them, they'll come right out. Put the correct bolts back in, and you're all good. So silicone over here in the corners, especially corners, small bead in this channel. Don't fill the whole thing up. You don't need to load this whole channel up with silicone. Just enough to make sure it's going to seal. I'll probably, we got some springiness there. So this is a metal core gasket with rubber or whatever on it. I'll flatten that out a little bit. I'll take some of that spring out, but I'm not going to go crazy. I'm not going to bend it back and forth. I'm not going to compromise the metal core. It was fairly flat in the package. It shouldn't be a problem. Alright, we're back. Now, I did cheat on the oil pan and used a cordless impact gun to pull those bolts out because there's just a bunch of them. They're all 7/16 head. There is one that you'll need a deep wall socket on it. It's got a stud attached to it. Allows you to put the transmission coil line clip on it. So that's the clip that just kind of, that's the clip. It slides up on the stud and holds the transmission coil lines on it. That's the actual stud. The short end goes into the block, long end protrudes down and slides into the orifice on that guy. So easy. A lot of these bolts were not tight. However, I do think that at some point some of them were over tightened. The reason I say that is the old gasket was pretty well killed. The rear end of it is still in the Jeep. It didn't come out with it. Actually just tore the end off. I do have some crud in the bottom here, and the general coloration of this pan makes me believe that this thing went way past overdue for oil changes, at least a few times. Obviously that oil is pretty black in there, so not really surprised. Didn't really expect to find anything wonderful here. You can see the rails of this oil pan are wet, so whether it was from oil leaking out from the inside or oil coming down from the valve pan gasket or valve cover gasket and just seeping in, doesn't really matter. There was oil everywhere, and this is very, very wet. Like, fairly sure that gasket wasn't doing much. So again, very necessary repair. There's enough oil in the gasket in the pan right now. I don't want to tip it over, but it is very crusty. Okay. It's still solid enough it wasn't giving up yet, but eventually this thing is going to have holes in it, so due for replacement. It is a messy job, so I did opt to just forgo the creeper and just put a big old piece of cardboard under there that can then be thrown out, but cuts down on cleanup after the fact. Cardboard was garbage anyway, so you can see we still got some dripping going on. I do have a pan under there to gather the most of it, but when you're underneath there alone with the pan coming down, you can't really you don't have enough hands to grab everything at once, so there is going to be some that gets past you. So if you have cardboard available, use it. Otherwise, if you have a big drip pan, like a big flat one that you can work up against, maybe have it pre-positioned. You're going to want it towards the back end. With the front axle in the vehicle, you're usually going to have to drop the back end of the pan first and then kind of pull the whole thing down and out backwards. And the tendency is going to be that most of the dripping is going to come off the oil pan, the oil pump pickup, which is towards the rear. It's where that sump is, the big old deep section of the pan. So that's where most of the dripping is going to happen. Now, with the amount of oil that was on the rails, every bolt I pulled out had oil weeping out of it. So that's what the little spatter marks are. So it's not a clean job. Don't wear your Sunday best. Make sure you're ready to get dirty. Being on a lift would be so much better, just because you can get out of the way of this stuff and let it fall down at your feet instead of on top of you, but it's very driveway doable. You just have to grin and bear it. I would recommend, if you don't wear glasses already, wear safety glasses, just to keep the bits and chunks from landing straight in your eyes. I do have some chunks on my glasses right now, so new and pretty, old and funky. All right, time for lunch. Okay, we took kind of a long lunch break. That was a mistake. We still gotta get some stuff done here. So this girdle that runs the full length of the engine, that has to come off. And then I have to take the two nuts that are under the girdle on this last cap, the rear main cap, off, so I can get that cap off and expose the rear main seal. So that's next up. Gotta find the right tools for those nuts and get that out of there. And I did still want to pull that inspection cover off so that I could try to clean up whatever mess is behind that. So here we go. Be back in a bit. Okay, we're getting into this now. Got that inspection cover off. It was pretty nasty. I've knocked down all the big grime off of it. Gave it a good wipe down. Get it a little bit cleaner, but the black spots I'm not worried about. That's probably a combination of staining and light corrosion. That's alright. This is an inspection cover. It just meant to keep the bulk of the grime out of the bell housing. It's not meant to be fluid tight, watertight, airtight, any of that nonsense. It's just a cover plate to keep the bulk of the grime out, but to allow you to get into the torque converter bolts so that you can separate the engine and transmission when you need to. So I'm honestly just gonna dust that off a little bit more and then bolt it back in, just to keep the rest of the crud from what I'm doing from this point out of the bell housing. I did poke my finger up in there. It's not wet inside the bell housing. It was really just the oil draining off the back of the engine, either from the rear main or from the valve cover, or both. I'm guessing both. I'm betting both. So yeah, that's gonna go back in a minute. It's just 3 bolts. This is just an additional cover that goes on the back end of the oil pan. They do get pretty fragile and brittle, so be careful with it, but that's going to need to get cleaned up as well before it goes back in. We got the girdle out. It came out without any real drama. I did have to put a breaker bar on those nuts. My little cordless impact driver wasn't knocking those off on its own, so I broke them loose with the breaker bar, 9/16 inch socket, and then backed them out the rest of the way with the impact driver. They will have to get proper torque. I'll look the values up when I get closer to reinstall. For now, I gotta clean up that cover piece. I need to get the main cap out, and I need to clean up the gasket surface all the way around the oil pan rail, and get that rear main back in. Well, get the rear main out and then get the new one in. So lots to do. I'm back at it. Okay, we got some more progress. Rear main is out and cruddy looking. You can see the remnants of that oil pan gasket stuck on there. I'll have to clean that up. That's the outside or back side of the rear main cap. It sits outside the engine, between the engine and the inspection cover on the transmission. This is the inside. That's the rear main bearing. Doesn't look awful, doesn't look great. I'll clean that up a little bit. No, I'm not going to mess with it much. And then that piece of pink right there, that's the rear main seal. So what we're going to do is the other one, the other half of it is above the crankshaft. We're going to take our punch and we're going to gently line it up and tap it and drive it through above the crankshaft and down out underneath it. Clean up the surrounding surfaces and then slide the new one in. So that's what's up next. Okay, So if you look, you can see the tip of the rear main seal is sticking out there and it's missing on that side. So it started to push itself around. I'll just catch this oil drip before it's in my face and on my beard. So now that we've got it coming along, we can try to grab it with some pliers and help it the rest of the way around. Now, you really don't want to touch the bearing surface on the crankshaft at all with any kind of tooling. There we go. Old one out. Let's get that one under here for a minute so we can look at this. So the rear main seal, to keep its shape, and this isn't focusing real well, but to keep its shape, it's got a piece of wire running through it. And that's where you want to drive it through with. You want to put the punch on the wire, not on the rubber. Gently tap it. If anything, aim the punch away from the shaft, the drive shaft, or crankshaft, sorry. Because if you slip and it makes a little bit of contact with the block, it probably won't go on anything. If you slip and you hit the crankshaft, you are going to scratch that seal surface and you will be enjoying rear main seal leaks for the rest of the life of the engine until you get it rebuilt with either a resurfaced or replaced crankshaft. So don't screw up the crankshaft. All right, time to clean stuff up. Okay, it's starting to get windy. It's starting to get late. We gotta get this done. This is the rear main seal. Notice it's got a lip. That's got to face inside. It's got to face into the engine. This is the outside, the back side, that's the front side. The two halves don't matter. Either one can go on the cap, either one can go in the engine. That's not the important part. The important part is getting that lip facing inwards. So it really just kind of squirts right in there. Now, I did clean everything up, so I did go ahead and put some heavy oil on the surface just to make sure that this thing doesn't start dry. But it's all cleaned up. New bearings or new seals going in. We'll put it back in there. Anaerobic gasket maker in the corners here, and it's going to be torqued to 80 foot-pounds. There's two rear main bolts, 80 foot-pounds. It's a 13/16 inch deep well socket because it does have the stud head on it. And just to show this part, they've got this little thing here that you can kind of tuck in and protect the engine, the crankshaft, as you're threading the other half in. So I want to go ahead and get that going. I'll put just a little bit of oil on there. This will get some oil on it as well, just so that it's not, again, a dry start where it goes in and tears the first time this engine revs up to 1,000 RPM, 1,000 horsepower. That would be great. Yeah, 1,000 RPM and just rips the rubber right off. So that's it for now. We'll get back after it. Okay, the rear main seal is in, the rear main cap is in, and you can see I did a little bit of manipulation to most of the bounce out of this thing. Sits really flat. So I'm going to put a little bit of silicone in the end galleys, just kind of some precautionary After I make sure there's no oil in there. I did clean everything up. So, yeah, losing light, getting towards the end of a long day. I'm moving kind of slow because I do. But yeah, getting towards the end of this. I am missing that one bolt, so this will be a majority install. I am going to let this thing sit to let all the silicone cure completely. I'm not in a hurry. I don't need to drive this tomorrow, so I don't need to slam oil into it and start it right away. So I did order some bolts, so that'll give time to get those in. I'll make sure that I've got the ends nice and tight, proper torque, and we'll just leave one somewhere in the middle where it's got a bolt on either side of it, so that will have minimal impact on the actual seating of the gasket and everything else. I don't think it'll be a big deal. All right. Okay, so you can see everything's back in there. The rail is cleaned up better than it was. It's not perfect. You know what? I'll get that spot a little. Kind of is what it is. Anyway, I've got these convenient pieces that will hold the pan. I think I was talking about before, allowing for good installation. I do think I'm gonna run some sort of a cleaning through here. I mean, I don't have chunks of anything anywhere, but there's certainly a good amount of baked on carbon going on in here. So yeah, you just kind of thread these in, and I may have to put the camera down to do this. But they just kind of, dipstick caught my finger. Yeah, they just kind of screw in there on the bigger holes, and there's 4 bigger holes. The bolt heads are actually all the same size. And there are 4 bolts that are a larger bolt size. And I'm not going to try to quote the size from memory because I don't remember. But it's a 7/16 inch socket. Alright. And you can see the timing cover meets the engine block here. So that's where I kind of put a little bit extra silicone to take up any unevenness in that surface area. So a little blue shop towel piece stuck up in here. Alright, so now I'm going to get the pan, I'm going to slide it over those dowel pins, it'll lock into place, and then I'll be able to start running bolts in. So I'm going to go ahead and put the camera down for now. I'm just going to need all this stuff out of the way. It should slide in relatively easy. Again, you just kind of got to angle the end in, the front end in, over the front axle, and then pivot the back end up over the sump here, over the oil pickup. Yeah, no big chunks in the oil pickup. There was no big chunks in the pan. I'm not too concerned. I think the engine is overall okay. All the wear surfaces are smooth, nothing crazy, nothing gold. So the outside is a rusty mess on the frame, but the engine seems okay for 184,000 miles. All right, back to it. All right, we're done. We're cleaned up. It's dark out. It could have gotten done faster. I could have not taken that long lunch break. Got some bits of stuff in my beard there from cleaning the gasket surface and what have you. But end of the day, oil pan is on, bolts are torqued. The starter's back in. The connector that was all frayed up is at the bottom of it, so that's an easy access kind of a thing. So no reason to leave the starter out and letting junk blow into that opening. Not the hardest job in the world, but again, this has been several days of other stuff. You've got to get the exhaust out of the way. The easiest way to do that is to get the skid plate off. Yeah, get the starter out of the way. That's easy enough. 2 bolts, 15 mil socket. Really not the end of the world here. So I am still missing the 1 bolt. I should have it in soon, but there was shipping delays. So once I get that, I will get under there and run that in, torque it to 84 inch-pounds. Oh, that's oil pan torques. So on the larger 4 bolts, it's 132 inch-pounds. On the smaller remaining bolts, it's 84 inch-pounds. Don't over torque the oil pan. You're gonna end up crushing the gasket, warping the flange, causing mischief and causing leaks. It doesn't make it better to make it tighter. Torque them in sequence. Don't just torque one all the way to heck down and go to the next one. Get them snugged up first so that the pan is fully seated. It's really not that hard of a job, and if you bust your butt and get after it, the whole job start to finish can be done in a weekend. I've done it. But if it's your daily driver, if you can make arrangements just in case you run into a problem, that's probably the best idea. Only because the exhaust is the mystery. If you start getting after the exhaust and the bolts are completely uncooperative like mine were on the exhaust manifold, then you're gonna have a bad time. It's gonna be harder. It really was the easiest thing for me was to take the fender off, which is a lot of work. It's not undoable. It's not horrible. If you have a garage at the house and have lights and some amount of climate control, then so much the better. Out on the driveway where you kind of stuck dealing with the rain and dealing with the sun and the clouds and whatever, it's better not to be working on this in the dark. That's when you make mistakes. And yeah, you can set up lights if you have them, but if you're using like a flashlight, then that's going to cast shadows, and it's always those shadows that get you. That's always where you miss something, there's a gap, or your hand slides off the wrench and snags a stud that's sticking out that you didn't see, and now you're bleeding all over the place. That's just that's just what happens when you're working in the dark with a flashlight. So I prefer not to if I can avoid it. But one step closer. We'll probably get after the transmission pan next week. The wife confirmed she wants the Metal Cloak arch fenders, so I'll probably order those soon so that I can pull the springs and shocks and cycle the suspension and see how far up I can go, and then figure out what kind of spring lengths I want and shocks and bump stops, all that kind of stuff to figure out just ride height and maximum tuck so that nothing hits anything. I should probably do that with the Dana 44 housing in here, but honestly, I think the tires are going to be the issue before the pumpkin. I don't think the differential is going to be that big of a difference. I'll look at it. Not too concerned. So anyway, final tally for right now, we've got the valve cover gasket replaced. We've got the oil pan gasket rear main seal replaced. We haven't done the belt tensioning setup or new belt yet. We replaced that melted cowl drain. We reinstalled the plastic track for the wire harness that goes behind the valve cover. That was missing. It was actually in the box of junk that came with the Jeep. We've not reinstalled the exhaust yet, but we do have the bolts and clip nuts for that, so that's ready to go back in. I may actually leave that out for now just because it's easier to deal with the transmission transfer case stuff when the exhaust pipes aren't right there. And I picked up a slip yoke eliminator kit, so that's going to help make the rear drive line a little better. That drive shaft is pretty crusty, so it was on the list of maybe replace anyway, and now it's on definitely replace. So that's it for the night. Have a great one. Alright, quick update. Ran to the hardware store and got that last quarter 20 thread bolt, 1/2 inch long, for the oil pan. So the oil pan is all snugged up, letting the silicone set for a couple of days because I can. I don't have any rush to get this thing filled back up. I'm not able to really run it right now because I've got the transfer case skid plate out from under, so nothing's supporting the tail end of the engine other than a jack stand under the transmission, so I don't really want to run it that way. So letting that kind of just cure and be one. There is no fresh strip marks today. Obviously the existing staining is there, but there's nothing fresh wet, so I think we've got most of the leaks under control from the engine. I am still going to pull the transmission pan out. I've got the new gasket, the new filter, and I've got new cooling lines on the way. I went ahead and just got the factory ones from Rock Auto. Yeah, it's more expensive, but the routing is proper for the engine, and it should be fine. So I just didn't feel like messing with aftermarket stuff for that. I like my drivetrain to be fairly stock on these things when I'm going out off in the woods. That way replacement parts are easier to come by, and I'm not getting outside of the specs from the manufacturer. So engine, transmission, transfer case are fairly safe as they can be when we're doing stupid things off-road. Pardon me. The flopping accumulator is what I'm addressing now. It was $19.99 online. They're used parts, but who cares? That bracket just slides up under the accumulator, and this piece is bolted to the firewall like so. And so this will just slide in there and get bolted on. Easy, easy. Not really anything I can show. So I'm just going to go ahead and get that done and have it checked off the list of missing unknown items. So one by one, getting them off the list.